Welcome to the Beau Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom. With all the bad, evil, and depressing news in the world, it's always nice to see that silver lining to the cloud. I think Senator Tim Scott is one of those silver linings. While many have posited that he is the exception to some rule of systemic racism, I don't think he's an exception. I think he's exceptional. There are people out there that just renew your faith in humanity. That maybe not everyone on Capitol Hill is a complete lying scumbag who goes whichever way the wind or the money blows. Because Scott is a black Republican, he represents a tremendous conundrum to liberals who think that all black people should be Democrats. When they lose the battle on the merits, they will just resort to name calling. And they have certainly come up with a number of names for Tim Scott. Scott said, quote, "I'm the candidate that the far left fears the most. When I cut your taxes, they call me a prop. When I refunded the police, they called me a token. When I pushed back on President Biden, they even called me the N-word. I disrupt their narrative. I threaten their control. The truth of my life disrupts their lies," unquote. And he's right. They've tried to call him every name in the book, with some likening him to Clarence Thomas, whom they have referred to as Uncle Clarence, a reference to Uncle Tom's Cabin. So the hosts of The View have said Scott has Clarence Thomas syndrome, as if being a black Republican is a mental or genetic disorder. Co-host Sunny Hostin, a true smear merchant, said, quote, "One of the issues that Tim Scott has is that he seems to think, because I made it, everyone can make it, ignoring again the fact that he's the exception and not the rule. And until he's the rule, then he can stop talking about systemic racism," unquote. Is it Hostin's authority to shut Tim Scott up? Does she get to decide when, where, and how Tim Scott speaks? Everyone has a say. That is the point of the First Amendment. But Hostin is one of those Orwellian, some are more equal than others kind of people, draped in the narcissism of her commentary. Joy Behar also made a similar quip, saying the following.
And he's one of these guys who, he's like Clarence Thomas, black Republican who believes in pulling yourself by your bootstraps, rather than, to me, understanding the systemic racism that African Americans face in this country and other minorities. He doesn't get it, neither does Clarence.
Right.
And that's why they're Republicans.
Yeah.
Scott had a rebuttal to this.
Plastic spoons, not silver spoons. But more importantly, Sean, you hit the nail on the head. Can you imagine an extreme liberal, an elitist telling me how to be a black man in America when she's a white lady who dresses up in blackface? I can't believe the hypocrisy that comes out of that show sometimes. It is the height of hypocrisy to suggest that I'm the exception when in fact their policy positions as the radical left creates a rule that simply says that in order for us to be successful, you have to go to a failing school. You have to stay in your place. You can't go up as high as you possibly can, the ladder. You have to actually stay at the bottom. Literally, they're suggesting that the rule that they want keeps poor kids in failing schools, keeps minorities at the bottom of the ladder, and then they remove the rungs of the ladder to climb. We are a meritocracy. Your talent, your character, your grit take you as high as you're willing to climb. But according to their policies, they take the first three rungs of the ladder out.
Perhaps Scott's worst critic has been the joyless Joy Reid over at MSNBC, who uses her platform to dog him every chance she gets, calling him everything from a prop to a minstrel. The truth is, how could Tim Scott get elected if Republicans in South Carolina are racists and bigots? Similarly to how Barack Obama had to be elected by a majority of white people, Tim Scott had to be elected by a majority of white South Carolinians. How does that happen if red states are truly all backwoods racists? Well, it can't happen. It means that whatever it is Tim Scott says, does, votes for, and represents also represents them, or else they would choose some other good old boy. This has been Joy Reid's Achilles heel for years. She just can't wrap her mind around why Tim Scott has been successful, black, Republican, and well, nice. His character precedes him. When Scott made the Republican rebuttal to Joe Biden's 2021 State of the Union, the hashtag Uncle Tim trended. They didn't listen to what he had to say. They just needed a name. Scott responded to this by saying, quote, "Intolerance so often comes from the left with words like Uncle Tim and the N-word being used against me." And last night, what was trending in social media was Uncle Tim. And they doubled down on this concept of liberal oppression. It is stunning in 2021 that those who speak about ending discrimination want to end it by more discrimination. The left has doubled down that they are going to not attack my policies, but they're literally attacking the color of my skin, unquote. They even attacked Scott's reference to MLK, thinking it's the only quote Republicans know. But does that make it any less true? And if we judge Scott by the content of his character, well, it's hard to argue that his character has been impeccable. So when they can't attack his character, they have to default to his skin color. But there's nothing to attack when it comes to his eloquence, grace, character, and class. I think it pains them that there is nothing there to attack, so all they can go after is his race, because it is expedient and convenient to do so. Whenever Republicans go on The View, they can expect poor treatment. After all, every conservative co-host of the show has vented how they were personally treated. So any guest would get that same treatment, whether it's Dr. Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, or Donald Trump Jr. Republicans face hostile treatment when Democrats get the swooning softball questions about their favorite color and ice cream. I've previously covered and scrutinized The View's strategy in employing a lopsided liberal panel that would seem to indicate that such is the composition of the country's ideology, but it simply isn't. I mean, imagine if Biden, Kamala, or any Democrat went on a show that had Kellyanne Conway, Ann Coulter, Candace Owens, Judge Jeanine Pirro, and Laura Ingraham on it. Do you see what I mean? The tables would be totally turned. But that's not how ABC wants it. So they ensure a certain composition of the panel. So when Senator Scott came on The View to respond to comments that Sunny Hostin and Joy Behar had made about him, you could guess that there would be some fireworks, though perhaps not Trump-like fireworks. But Scott has such a genteel way about him and a calm disposition that it's hard to rip him apart. But this was really the crux of the senator's message to the ladies.
You are the first black senator elected in the South since the Reconstruction. That would be about 114 years. Yet you say that your life disproves leftist lies. And
Yes.
my question to you is, I'm the exception, right? You're the exception. Maybe even Miss Whoopi Goldberg is the exception.
Oh, she's definitely the
but we are not the rule. And so when it comes to racial inequality, it persists in 5 core aspects of life in the U.S. Economics, education, healthcare, criminal justice, and housing. At nearly every turn, these achievements were fought, threatened, and erased, most often by white violence. You have indicated that you don't believe in systemic racism. What is your definition of systemic racism?
Let me answer the question that you've answered.
Or does it even exist in your mind?
Let me answer the question this way. One of the things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show, is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today, that the only way to succeed is by being the exception. I will tell you that if my life is the exception, I can't imagine.
But it is.
But it's not, actually. It's
been 114 years.
Yeah, so the fact of the matter is we've had an African-American president, African-American vice president. We've had 2 African-Americans to be secretaries of the state. In my home city, the police chief is an African-American who's now running for mayor. The head of the highway patrol for South Carolina is an African-American.
Still exceptions.
In 1975, there was about 15% employment in the African-American community. For the first time in the history of the country, it's under 5%.
40% homelessness.
And 50%
of African Americans,
50% of the folks in our community.
Yet 13% of the population.
You had the chance to ask the question. I know that I've watched you on the show that you like people to be deferential and respectful, so I'm going to do the same thing.
That is true.
I'll pause here because you will notice how Sunny Hostin tries to fact check him by interrupting him. And Scott calls her out, but in a very respectful way. And it leaves Hostin almost speechless because she says, "Yeah, that is true. even though we know that Hostin is not respectful to her conservative guests at all. He continues.
So here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest the fact of the matter is that progress in America is palpable. It could be measured in generations. I look back at the fact that my grandfather, born in 1921 in Sally, South Carolina, when he was on a sidewalk, a white person was coming, he had to step off and not make eye contact. That man believed then, with some doubt now, in the goodness of America, because he believed that having faith in God, faith in himself, and faith in what the future could hold for his kids would unleash opportunities in ways that you cannot imagine. Every kid today can look, just change the stations and see how much progress has been made in this country. ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, CNN, Fox News all have African American and Hispanic hosts. So what I'm suggesting is that the yesterday's exception is today's rule. And for us to suggest...
America has met its promise.
No, of course, the concept of America is that we are going to become a more perfect union. But in fact, the challenges that we faced 50 years ago and 60 years ago should not be the same challenges that we face today. And here's the way that you measure that. When my mother was born, about 10% of African Americans got a high school degree, diploma. Today, it's over 90%. When you look at the income, success that we've had...
That's an HBCU stat.
Well, listen, HBCU stat is a good one, because one of the reasons why I took the funding for HBCUs to the highest level in the history of the country, and then I helped make it permanent, is because I believe that education is the closest thing to magic in America. So I'm about making sure that our kids have as many opportunities to succeed as possible. It's one of the reasons why...
I need an opportunity to succeed, because I have to go to... They're begging.
We have more time, though.
They're begging. You're coming.
I'm just getting started.
I know.
I believe all people can see the success that I've had.
I think he said something very profound. Yesterday's exception is today's rule. That's true. Progress is a generational concept. Does it mean that we have fulfilled the dream? No. But the dream is an ever-evolving concept. It will never be perfect by anyone's perception. But it is always better today than it was yesterday. Some believe that Tim Scott is the exception. But as he explains, his mother, his grandfather, all of his ancestors progressively had better futures. So that now, Tim Scott is a United States Senator. And that was just in 2 generations. That can't happen if America is not fulfilling its promise. The difference is that Scott doesn't believe in reparations and redistribution. He believes in a self-fulfilling promise using tools like education and self-drive. Ben Carson believes in this same philosophy.